The smack came without warning, the sharp sting of a palm against a 4-year-old's cheek, and the cabin's hum fell into a stunned, unnatural quiet. Earlier that morning, at the gate in Boston Logan International Airport, Noah Ellison had looked up at his father with wide, trusting eyes. "You'll be safe up there, buddy. You belong." Elias had said it like a promise, the kind that stayed in a boy's chest and made him stand a little taller. That memory now flashed in the boy's mind, but it collided hard with the reality of the slap. The purpose of this first chapter is to draw the reader into Noah's world, to feel the rush of pride he carried into the aircraft, and then the weight of humiliation that replaced it in a single moment. It must establish his quiet, steady nature, the poise of his companion Clara Jennings, and the simmering disdain of Marjorie Kane, who hides her prejudice behind the crisp folds of an airline uniform. The autumn light in Boston had been golden, glancing off the wide windows of Terminal C as Noah and Clara walked down the jet bridge. Clara carried the boarding passes in one hand, a small satchel in the other. Noah clutched his own treasure, a folded sheet of drawing paper with a red crayon airplane, its wings slightly uneven, and the words, "For Daddy," scrawled in large, careful letters. The scent of jet fuel lingered faintly, mixing with the industrial chill of conditioned air. Inside the first-class cabin, the air seemed heavier. Leather seats in muted gray lined either side of a wide aisle. Reading lights glowed warmly over passengers already settled. Newspapers unfolded, soft jazz from the 1960s playing low from hidden speakers. A businessman in a pinstripe suit looked up once at the small boy, then down again, folding his paper with deliberate slowness. Clara guided Noah to seat 4D. He climbed up, legs swinging, eyes darting from the glossy safety card to the window with its view of the tarmac. From the galley, Marjorie Kane approached. Her Navy uniform was perfectly pressed, blonde hair drawn tight at the nape, a smile that did not reach her eyes. She stopped at their row, glancing from Clara to Noah, then to the boarding passes. She read them twice, as if searching for an error. "Children under 6 are not permitted in this cabin," she said evenly, though her arms crossed in a way that made the statement feel final. Clara's tone was measured. "There's a special arrangement. Mr. Ellison cleared it personally with your gate supervisor." "I don't have any record of that," Marjorie replied, the smile gone now. "Policy is policy." Noah had been watching quietly, pressing the folded drawing against his chest. "But my daddy said—" That was when her hand came down, sudden and sharp. The sound carried further than it should have, slicing through the low music. Noah's head rocked slightly to the side, his eyes wide, blinking. The paper slipped from his fingers and landed face up on the carpet. Marjorie bent, snatched it, and tore it in two, the ripping sound louder than the engines outside. Gasps came from somewhere behind them. A woman's intake of breath. A man's murmured, "Did she just—" But no one stood. No one spoke. Clara inhaled slowly, the kind of breath you take when you know the wrong move could make things worse. She reached down, gathered both halves of the drawing, and laid them gently on Noah's lap. "It's all right, sweetheart," she whispered, though her eyes stayed locked on Marjorie's retreating back. Noah's hand drifted to the band on his wrist, green silicone with a small glass face. He didn't notice the faint, blinking light that had begun to pulse beneath the surface. He sat still, knees drawn up, one half of the drawing folded over the other, as if pressing them together could undo the rip. Across the aisle, a woman in pearls leaned toward her husband, speaking behind her hand. "This is why they shouldn't let children in first class." The man nodded without looking up from his newspaper. The low murmur of conversation returned, but it seemed to skirt around Noah's seat, as if the incident had cast an invisible barrier around him. Clara draped a blanket across his legs. "You were perfect," she said softly. He nodded without lifting his eyes from the paper. Far above the cabin ceiling, signals traveled unseen. The faint green pulse on Noah's wrist quickened, each beat transmitting biometric data across networks and satellites to a server in Boston's Seaport district. It was a system designed for silent emergencies, conceived not to replace human decency, but to act when it failed. Noah shifted, glancing once toward the galley where Marjorie's silhouette moved between champagne flutes. Her face was turned away, her movements precise, her demeanor untroubled. She hadn't looked his way again, but the shadow of the slap stayed with him like a cold hand on his cheek. The businessman in 4C adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, then pretended to scroll through his tablet. He didn't see the way Clara's hand stayed on the edge of Noah's seat, a quiet guardrail. Outside the window, the late afternoon sun dipped lower, turning the clouds to molten gold. Inside, the air remained cool, climate-controlled, indifferent. From the moment he'd stepped into the cabin, Noah had felt a kind of pride, the kind that made him sit up straight, that made him believe in his father's words. Now he felt smaller, not from the seat's size, but from the weight of eyes that looked past him. In the forward galley, Marjorie spoke quietly to a junior attendant, her voice carrying just enough to be caught in fragments. Not appropriate, premium passengers, atmosphere. The younger attendant glanced toward Noah, then away. Noah traced the frayed edge of his seatbelt with one finger, over and over, the motion small but steady. He thought of the airplane he'd drawn that morning, of how the wings looked just right to him, and how he'd wanted his father to see it first, before anyone else. Clara noticed the way his gaze stayed fixed downward. "Do you want some juice, Noah?" she asked. He shook his head without speaking. Somewhere behind them, a man shifted in his seat. "Didn't they used to have a separate family cabin?" Another voice replied quietly. "Not any more too expensive." The green light under Noah's sleeve blinked again, and somewhere in Boston, a small red banner flashed across a secure monitor. The system recognized a Class A trigger, minor in size, but significant in implication. The seatback screen in front of Noah still played a nature documentary wide shots of forests and rivers, but he wasn't watching. He thought instead of the smoothness of the paper before it tore, and of his father's voice telling him he belonged. Marjorie passed again, a bottle of sparkling water in hand. Her eyes flicked down briefly but did not stop. Clara straightened in her seat, her hand tightening on the blanket in a gesture so slight it could have been missed. At that moment, in an office high above the Boston waterfront, Elias Ellison glanced at his tablet mid-meeting. A single line of text flashed at the bottom. Device Noah Ellison Flight AV402 status, elevated distress. His hand stilled. His mind shifted from the room around him to 30,000 feet above the Atlantic. Back in 4D, Noah pressed the halves of his drawing together, the tear running down the middle like a fault line. It didn't fit perfectly anymore, but he held it anyway, as if the warmth of his hands could make it whole again. No one had told him to move. No one had tried to comfort him beyond Clara's quiet voice. The passengers kept reading, sipping, typing. Outside, the wing cut through the sky with the ease of routine. But inside the quiet circuits of a bracelet, something had begun to count the beats of a small heart, the heat of flushed skin, the stillness that meant a child had chosen silence over tears. And far away, a man who had promised his son he would never be left alone was already rising from his chair. Noah's wristband flashed once more, unnoticed by him, bright against the soft gray of the blanket. And far up in the galley, Marjorie Kane smiled faintly at a passenger in row 1, unaware that the balance of control on this flight had just shifted. Noah's wristband flashes green, a light he doesn't fully understand. While far away in Boston, a server deep inside Aerovista's headquarters registers a silent alert. In a sunlit, glass-walled boardroom, Elias Ellison's voice froze mid-sentence as a red notification blinked in the corner of his tablet. The air in the room had been comfortable, a polished rhythm of small talk between presentations. But the glow of that alert cut through the scene like a siren only he could hear. That morning, before the boarding pass was scanned, Elias had knelt beside his son in the busy terminal. He'd pointed to the green band on Noah's wrist, tapped the surface until it blinked. "That's our secret handshake," he had whispered. "If anything feels wrong, it will tell me." He'd meant it as a comfort. Now, seeing the warning in front of him, he understood it as a challenge to act. The entire purpose of this moment for him was suddenly, starkly clear. He was not just the head of Aerovista Airlines sitting in a meeting about expansion strategies. He was a father who had designed a system precisely for the kind of breach that was now unfolding. The boardroom's sleek lines and carefully arranged reports faded into the background as he excused himself without explanation, chair wheels sliding back with a muted scrape. Stepping into the private corridor, the ambient noise of Boston's Seaport district buzzed faintly through the glass. The harbor glimmered in the distance, beyond cranes and ferries. He moved quickly to his office, a space walled in steel, glass, and photographs, a framed black and white of his father in a pilot's cap, a shadow box containing the wings from his grandfather's Air Force service. The tablet in his hand vibrated again, the red bar expanding across the screen. Class A distress, device Noah Ellison, Flight AV-402. He sat at his desk, opened the Secure Sky Ethics Core interface, and entered a passcode known to only 3 people in the company. The screen shifted to a biometric feed. Noah's heart rate above normal, stress indicators climbing, oxygen saturation dipping slightly. No video, no sound, just a numerical scream that Elias had trained himself to recognize. His assistant appeared in the doorway. "Do you need the next presentation queued up, sir?" "Cancel the next hour," Elias said without looking up, "and secure a private line to AV-402's data stream." The assistant nodded, retreating quickly. Alone, Elias studied the numbers. Every pulse felt like it landed directly in his chest. He hovered over the override option. It was not a decision to make, lightly invoking it would immediately remove certain controls from the cockpit and alert every crew member on board that something outside their authority was watching. It was designed for catastrophic ethical breaches in real time, the sort of moments that training modules could never prepare anyone for. In his mind, he could still see Noah at the gate that morning, backpack slung over one small shoulder, grinning because "I'll be good, Daddy" felt like a gift to give. Elias's jaw tightened. This was not about being good. This was about being right. He pressed the command. Above the Atlantic, the first-class cabin of AV-402 shifted imperceptibly. Seatback screens froze mid-frame, a cooking show caught with a chef's hand raised, a flight map paused mid-arc over ocean blue. A soft chime sounded, a note passengers hadn't heard before, somewhere between a tone and a breath. Lights dimmed half a shade, enough for people to glance up from their magazines. In the forward galley, Marjorie Kane tapped her earpiece. "Captain, we've got a system hiccup in the front. Seat monitors just glitched. Want me to reset?" No answer. She tried again. "Cabin crew to cockpit. Do you read?" Static. Clara Jennings, in seat 4D, glanced up but said nothing. She reached over, adjusted the blanket on Noah's lap. The boy sat very still, his hands resting on the folded halves of his drawing, his eyes fixed on the darkened screen ahead. Elias's interface now displayed the confirmation. Blue Whisper Protocol engaged. A message scrolled in calm, neutral type across the cabin monitors. Cabin under integrity review. Do not interfere. It was the opposite of an airline apology script. It did not explain. It did not placate. It simply told everyone that someone higher was now in control. In the captain's seat, a man who had flown for 28 years stared at the code on his own panel. He recognized the origin. Executive Tier Command, Aerovista Ethics Control, Boston. He exchanged a glance with his first officer, no words, just a silent understanding that this was not a drill. Back in the cabin, a man in 3A leaned forward. "Ever seen that before?" he whispered to the woman beside him. "Never," she replied, eyes scanning the message again. "And I've flown more miles than I can count." Marjorie's steps slowed as she moved down the aisle. Her professional smile was still in place, but her shoulders had gone rigid. The thought that this was random was fading fast. Her gaze darted to the boy in 4D, then away again. Elias adjusted his chair, leaning closer to the screen. A second window opened. Crew voice logs were now being recorded in real time, every word indexed for compliance review. He could almost hear the silence that would hang in the cabin after a message like that appeared. Clara, still beside Noah, felt the change. She had worked in caregiving long enough to know the difference between quiet and stillness. This was stillness. The kind that meant people were waiting for someone else to move first. Marjorie stopped just short of their row, eyes flicking briefly to Noah's wristband. She moved on, but her pace was slower now, her confidence tinged with calculation. Somewhere over the mid-Atlantic, between blue water and blue sky, the cabin had entered a space that was neither routine nor chaotic. It was under watch. Elias's finger hovered over another option, a direct message to the captain, but he refrained. The system was already doing what it was built for, halting the moment, freezing the flow, forcing attention. On board, passengers exchanged low murmurs. A man further back tapped his screen, muttering about his movie freezing. A woman near the front adjusted her silk scarf, whispering something about corporate oversight to her seatmate. The systems remained locked. No reset came from the cockpit. The Blue Whisper Protocol's timer counted down in the corner of Elias's interface, 5 minutes of total control before the crew could resume normal operation. Back in 4D, Noah's bracelet had stopped its green pulse. It now glowed steadily white, a quiet signal to the system that the distress had been acknowledged and action was underway. The boy's eyes stayed forward, but the slight easing in his shoulders told Clara he felt the shift, even if he didn't understand its mechanics. In the galley, Marjorie picked up the service phone again. "Cockpit, confirm if this is a training protocol or static." The cabin was now a stage set for something no one had rehearsed. And as the glow from the bracelet reflected faintly off the edge of the seat, the message on every monitor held firm, unblinking. Cabin under integrity review. Do not interfere. Marjorie Kane, mid-service, stops cold as every monitor in first class displays. Cabin under integrity review. Do not interfere. The captain's headset crackled, not with a weather report, but a priority override code he'd never seen in 28 years of flying. He lifted one ear cup, as if a different angle might make the string of letters and numbers rearrange into something familiar, but the origin tag stayed the same. Executive Tier Command, Aerovista Ethics Control, Boston. Earlier in the flight, in the hush of the forward galley, Marjorie Kane had told a junior attendant, almost like a creed, that children changed the atmosphere of first class. "It is not the right fit for this cabin," she had said, smoothing the line of her sleeve, as if that might smooth the presence of a 4-year-old in seat 4D. The memory landed with a cold weight now, as lights along the aisle dimmed half a notch, and every seatback monitor held still, the image frozen between frames. What had felt like ritual premium service, controlled voices, the curated calm had shifted into a stillness that watched everyone back. The change had one purpose, and it was felt first in small places. The way conversations trailed off mid-syllable, the way a wine glass was set down a touch too carefully, the way a blanket was tugged one more inch to cover a child's knees. It was designed to sweep the theater of air travel free of noise and demand a kind of collective noticing. Marjorie stepped out of the galley with a practiced smile and found her steps slowing with each row, as if the carpet had thickened. She lifted the handset, pressed the crew line to the cockpit, and listened. The only response was a thin skein of static. At 4D, Clara Jennings moved like a harbor light, steady in the dim. She tucked the edges of the blanket around Noah Ellison's legs, then smoothed the small wrinkle that would have tickled his ankle. Noah's hands rested on his lap, the torn halves of his drawing pressed together so the red crayon wings almost aligned. The bracelet at his wrist no longer pulsed green. It held a soft, unwavering white, a small moon under his sleeve. A businessman in 3C leaned toward his wife, lowering his voice but not his certainty. "That bracelet," he murmured. "It is not a hospital band. That is corporate tech." She angled her head to study the pale glow under Noah's sweater cuff, then looked away quickly, as if eye contact might implicate her in whatever the plane was becoming. In the flight deck, the first officer's hands hovered over controls that were not malfunctioning so much as they were politely commandeered. The priority code message ran again, accompanied by a countdown block marked Blue Whisper Protocol. The captain's expression barely shifted. He carried the calm of someone who had talked planes through engine hiccups, weather shears, the long patience of holding patterns. But this was new. This was not atmosphere or avionics. This was governance, and it had arrived mid-air. Down the aisle, a woman in pearls adjusted her noise-canceling headphones and said to no one and everyone, "This is what entitlement looks like. Children in spaces meant for adults." The word hung there, old and brittle, and found purchase in a few nods, though others kept their eyes on their hands. Marjorie tried the interphone again, softer now, as if gentleness could tempt a reply. "Cockpit, confirm reset authorization for cabin AV systems." Static. She kept the receiver to her ear a second longer than necessary, then replaced it with deliberate care. She had noticed the message on the passengers' screens, "Cabin under integrity review. Do not interfere," and a prickle spread along the back of her neck. If it were a systems test, it would have been labeled. If it were a glitch, the cockpit would have spoken by now. A little boy from economy class, maybe 6, drifted forward during the lull, curiosity overruling the curtain's soft admonition. He carried a paper napkin folded twice and a stub of skeletally thin airline crayon. His father called once, quietly, but the boy moved another step and watched the child in 4D with the kind of focus children give to other children. "Here," he said, voice small but somehow clean. "You can draw something new." Clara's eyes softened. Noah blinked, then nodded, accepting the napkin without a word. The father reached the line in the carpet and touched his son's shoulder. "Back to our seats," he murmured, and the boy obeyed, still looking over his shoulder as he retreated, like a small lighthouse, turning away. Murmurs swelled and thinned. A woman in 2A wondered aloud if it was a test flight. Someone else said it felt like corporate legal had climbed aboard. The message on the screens did not change, and that refusal to elaborate made it louder than any apology. In Boston, a ledger of numbers continued to stream and normalize. At altitude, The white on Noah's wristband steadied the way a hand on a shoulder steadies breath. Clara watched it flicker along the edges when his fingers tightened, and then release when she spoke quietly. She said things that were true because she made them true. You are safe. I am here. You belong. Marjorie built her face again in the reflective strip of the galley's stainless steel. She reapplied lipstick with the precision she started her day with and squared her shoulders, remaking herself into the kind of person who could walk to seat 4D and request a relocation as if nothing exceptional had happened. But the cabin had changed its terms. A compliance chime sounded, and every handset along the aisle displayed a line of text reserved for instances few would witness in a career. Crew communications are now being recorded and indexed. She let the handset hang in the cradle without touching it, as though the plastic might burn. What is happening? The junior attendant whispered, eyes flitting between passengers and the frozen map across the aisle. Service continues, Marjorie said automatically. The words felt borrowed. She smoothed a stack of linen napkins again, just to make her hands do something. The captain finally spoke to the cabin, voice even, trained to pour oil on troubled waters. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing an unexpected systems alert that requires our attention. We appreciate your calm and cooperation. It was the tone, more than the words, that suggested he was communicating two directions at once. Reassurance downward to passengers, and obedience upward to whatever sat on the other end of the override. Clara turned the napkin so Noah could choose a corner and set the crayon where his fingers could find it without looking. He made a single small line. Then another. Not an airplane yet, just a horizon. He pressed more softly than before, like he was testing whether marks could be made here without being torn away. From row 3, a man said, "This is coming from headquarters." He made it sound like gossip upgraded to fact through tone alone. "They are watching us." His seatmate shivered in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Marjorie's training offered a flowchart for nearly everything. Turbulence, drunk passengers, mechanical delays, fear of flying. There was no page labeled Executive Ethics Intervention Mid-Air. She straightened, stepped into the aisle, and began to move forward. Her mind gathered justifications the way a storm gathers leaves. Policy, precedent, the sanctity of premium space. She told herself that control could be rebuilt through repetition, that gloved hands, evenly poured drinks, and the grammar of service would steady the narrative of the cabin. 2 steps later, the forward jump seat handset buzzed, not with voice, but with text in the direct, unadorned language of an instruction that could not be negotiated. Maintain current seating arrangements. Do not approach subject under protection. The words carried no anger, only edges. She stopped, as if the carpet had grabbed her ankles. In the cockpit, the first officer read the second half of the priority message. The letters looked ordinary. The effect was not. Divert to San Juan International Airport. Non-negotiable. Provide crew manifest upon arrival. The captain's hand hovered over the mic switch to address the cabin again, then lowered. He adjusted course with small motions born of muscle memory and years of flying in weather that tried to lean on him. This, too, was a kind of weather. The rumor tide along the aisle changed, going out, coming back in with words like diversion, compliance, review. A traveler with a silver hard-shell carry-on hissed that she would miss a connection in St. Thomas. She said it to anyone who would listen, and therefore to no one. The woman in pearls crossed one leg over the other and repeated, "Entitlement," like a charm that might return the cabin to what she thought it had been. Clara felt the subtle change in the plane's posture as the new heading set. A fine pressure settled and then lightened in the joints. She looked at Noah. His shoulders had not flinched. He pressed another line onto the napkin, then lifted the crayon and made a small curved arc, the beginnings of a wing or a smile. It could become either, and that choice seemed like power. "Is this legal?" a man asked in a voice that turned the question into a verdict. No one answered, because legality was not what had taken the room. It was sight, the kind that made denial difficult to maintain as a social sport. Marjorie watched the junior attendant pass water to row one with hands that tried not to shake. She told herself that if she could keep the choreography of service intact, she could force the narrative back into its lines. She stepped into the aisle again, not toward 4D this time, but toward the galley interphone, as if proximity to equipment could anchor her authority. The handset buzzed before she reached it. She read the message, and the muscles in her jaw twitched. In the operations radio room on the ground, a voice identified itself in clipped clarity. Compliance officers requesting arrival data for diverted flight. Provide full crew manifest upon landing. The request moved through channels until it reached the cockpit printer in a thin ribbon of paper and through the jump seat handset in a direct message. One name had been typed into the line where names are not usually singled out. The captain's announcement came again, the voice of a man who knows his job is to keep hearts from racing as fast as engines. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an unexpected systems alert, we will be diverting to San Juan International Airport. Estimated arrival is in approximately 23 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The sentence did not tremble. That was what made it soothing. Marjorie did not sit. She stood near the galley door, reading and rereading the words that did not change, as if repetition might offer a loophole. Her name lived there now, in the text from compliance, like a bell tolling in print. She tried the cockpit one more time, not expecting an answer, and not receiving one. The junior attendant swallowed and began to collect service items the way you pack up a picnic when thunder is audible, but still far off. At 4D, Noah lifted the napkin so the crayon arc could catch the small reading light. He did not say the line out loud, but it existed in him. If a drawing can be broken, a drawing can be made again. The bracelet at his wrist glowed white and calm, and his breath matched it, in and out, even and quiet. From 2A, someone whispered, "Executive tier, that means corporate suite." Another passenger answered with a soft sound that could have been agreement or fear. They were all learning, in various keys, that silence is not the same as invisibility. The captain acknowledged the instruction for the manifest. The first officer keyed the code that would ping the ground team with the names and positions of everyone working the cabin. On the jump seat display, the request scrolled one more time for the avoidance of doubt, formal language carrying a single sharp detail. Provide full crew manifest upon landing, naming Marjorie Kane specifically. The information arrived at the forward handset as text that could not be argued with. It did not accuse, it did not explain. It named. And the naming drew a line around the narrative and closed it like a clasp. Marjorie stiffened, realizing the oversight isn't random, it's aimed at her, and she doesn't yet know who is behind it. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but final. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be making an unscheduled landing in San Juan. Please remain seated." The words floated through the cabin with the steadiness of a man who had long since mastered the art of sounding unshaken, but beneath them was a current that even the least attentive passengers could feel. Elias Ellison had once told an interviewer, in the days when Aerovista was building its ethics oversight system, "An ethical safeguard is only as strong as the speed with which it acts." That line had made its way into industry magazines, framed as vision. Now it was more than vision. It was a descending reality for everyone on board AV-402. The descent came with subtle shifts, the change in engine pitch, the way the fuselage seemed to lean into the pull of gravity, and the soft creak of the overhead bins adjusting to pressure. Outside the windows, the late afternoon light poured gold over the curve of ocean, streaks of sun marking the waves like deliberate brush strokes. Inside, the air was tighter, the voices lower. Marjorie Kane stood in the forward galley, her professional posture still in place, but showing its strain in the way she adjusted her cuffs twice in 1 minute. Her lipstick was fresh, her hair smooth, but her knuckles tightened imperceptibly as she gripped a stack of neatly folded service cloths. She had built her career on the appearance of control, and now the message on the seatback screens, subject under protection, "Do not interfere," hung over the cabin like a commandment. In 4D, Clara Jennings fastened Noah's seatbelt with the gentle authority of someone who had secured 100 restless children before takeoff and landing. She tucked the napkin drawing barely begun, just a horizon line and a hint of a wing under the blanket on his lap. "We're almost there," she said quietly. Noah gave the smallest of nods, his eyes fixed ahead, as if looking too closely at anything might break the careful hold he had on himself. Row by row, passengers began to understand this was not a weather diversion. A woman in row 2, voice pitched just above a whisper, said to her husband, "That's her. She's the one who slapped the boy." The words moved like smoke along the aisle, picked up by one, then another, until it reached the ears of those seated far from the scene, but close enough to catch the tone of something shared in confidence. Heads turned discreetly toward Marjorie. Clara sat straighter, a subtle shield between Noah and the eyes that lingered a little too long. She kept her voice low, leaning in to murmur something that made him glance at her for the first time since the announcement. "You've done everything right," she told him. Near the bulkhead, a businessman bent toward the aisle, scanning the screens that had reverted to the compliance message. "It's coming from HQ," he muttered to no one in particular. "That's why the crew isn't saying more." The descent steepened, the horizon outside rising in the windows. The coastline of Puerto Rico began to take form, jagged edges cutting into the blue, the airport runways stretching like thin ribbons at the edge of the city. The setting sun threw long shadows over the buildings, turning glass facades into sheets of copper. Marjorie tried one more time to raise the cockpit on the crew interphone. "First officer, confirm if we have ground support on standby." The reply was flat, clipped. "Confirmed, non-negotiable." And then, after a pause that felt deliberate, "They want the crew manifest upon arrival." She held the handset a second too long before returning it to its cradle. The landing gear extended with a muted thump. The cabin swayed gently as the flaps adjusted. From her window seat, the woman in pearls gave a small huff, muttering about entitlement disrupting schedules. But her voice carried less conviction now. Noah's gaze flickered toward the window as the city came closer. Clara placed her hand lightly over his, the weight of it steadying. The bracelet at his wrist remained a calm white, but Clara could see the faint reflection of it in the window, like a lighthouse flashing at a distance. The wheels touched down with a firm but smooth thud, rubber meeting asphalt in a long exhale. The reverse thrusters engaged, the hum turning into a low roar as the aircraft slowed along the runway. The smell of hot brakes and faint jet fuel drifted into the cabin. When the engines settled into their taxi hum, the captain's voice returned, more formal now. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Airport authorities will be boarding momentarily. Do not stand until instructed." It was not the usual welcome to your destination script. Passengers exchanged glances, quick, sharp. A man in row 6 whispered, "Did we just get hijacked without knowing it?" Someone else replied, No, this feels corporate. Marjorie adjusted her jacket, smoothed the front of her skirt, and positioned herself near the galley door. She had reapplied her smile, but her hands were clasped tightly behind her back, the tendons visible. The jet bridge connected with a soft, mechanical hiss. Two uniformed men stepped into the cabin first, their badges gleaming, followed by a man in a gray suit wearing an Aerovista compliance lanyard. His expression was neutral, his gaze sweeping the cabin with clinical efficiency. "Lead Flight Attendant Marjorie Kane," he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard over the hum of the air system. Her head lifted. "Yes. Please step forward. You'll remain on board for debrief." The passenger's attention sharpened like a camera lens. In row 2, the couple who had spoken earlier exchanged a small, grim nod. A woman whispered again, "That's the one." In 4D, Noah's fingers tightened slightly on the blanket, but his face remained still. The glow from his bracelet softened to a pale blue, a color that seemed to settle the air around him. Clara's hand stayed on his shoulder as Marjorie began the walk down the aisle. Halfway to the rear, Marjorie's gaze caught Noah's. It was only for a heartbeat, but in that moment, the poise in her expression cracked. What replaced it wasn't anger or defiance, it was fear, the sharp awareness of being seen without the armor of authority. As she passed, the space between seats felt narrower, the air heavier, each step a count toward something she could not control. As Marjorie walks past, her eyes meet Noah's for a fraction of a second, and for the first time, she looks afraid. Elias Ellison didn't look up from the live feed as Marjorie Kane was escorted off the aircraft. His focus was already on the passenger manifest and the next steps. The images streamed in silence across multiple monitors, one showing the cabin from a fixed angle, another the jet bridge where uniformed staff guided passengers toward the terminal. For him, this was not a spectacle. It was the midpoint of a process he had been preparing for years. Not long ago, Noah had asked him, in that straightforward way children have, "If someone's mean to me, will you hear it?" Elias had knelt then, answering without hesitation, "Always." It had been a promise rooted in instinct, but now it was a measurable reality, each biometric reading and camera angle confirming that he was hearing his son without a single word spoken aloud. The private operations suite in Aerovista's Boston headquarters was a deliberate contrast to the airy, glass-walled boardrooms elsewhere in the building. Here, the lighting was even and low, designed for focus. Banks of screens stretched across one wall, displaying live cabin feeds, security footage from San Juan International Airport, and an array of data points, pulse, oxygen levels, movement patterns for the passenger-designated Subject 1, Noah Ellison. A leather armchair in the corner held a small indentation from years of use. It had belonged to Elias's father, a captain who'd flown 747s before most of the current fleet's pilots had their licenses. The senior compliance officer stood to his right, scrolling through the initial incident report. "We have the video, sir. It's clean. No obstructions. Multiple witnesses visible." His tone was professional, but there was an undercurrent of certainty, the kind that came from knowing the evidence spoke for itself. The corporate communications lead hovered at the doorway. "We can prepare a controlled release, but we should consider an embargo until legal reviews it in full. The optics." "No embargo," Elias said, cutting through without raising his voice. "The public sees it tonight." His eyes never left the main screen. In one frame, Clara Jennings could be seen leaning slightly toward Noah as passengers filed past. The boy was still in his seat, calm, the bracelet at his wrist glowing faintly under the cabin lights. In San Juan, compliance officers had begun taking statements from passengers who remained at the gate area. A man in a gray suit held a tablet toward a couple from row 2. They gestured toward the front of the aircraft, recounting what they had seen. On another screen, Marjorie sat in a small, windowless holding room just off the jet bridge. The audio feed was muted, but the footage showed her speaking quickly, her hands moving in clipped gestures. A second later, the compliance officer across from her tapped the screen of his tablet, and a new video began to play her own actions, recorded from the cabin cameras. She stilled, her mouth closing as she watched herself reach down, slap, and tear. A quiet chime sounded in the operations suite. The FAA's request came through, flagged in orange. Immediate meeting requested on youth passenger safety policy. "Confirm," Elias said without looking up. The senior compliance officer made the notation. The communications lead tried again. "Sir, if we go public this fast, we bypass the narrative framing." "Good," Elias replied. "This isn't about framing. It's about showing exactly what happened, without edits, without apology." On the smaller split screen, Clara and Noah finally stepped off the aircraft. A compliance officer met them at the jet bridge and guided them toward a quieter side corridor. Clara had her hand on Noah's shoulder. The boy looked ahead, not around. Marjorie's formal debrief began in the holding room. She cited policy enforcement, claimed the seating arrangement was in violation of regulations, but the compliance officer countered with the booking confirmation, the special care designation, and the supervisor's approval logged before boarding. Then, with precise detachment, he played the video again, this time at half speed. Elias folded his arms, his eyes narrowing just slightly as he watched her reaction. He had seen that look before, the moment when certainty met evidence. The operations console chimed again. Media outlets were picking up the diversion, pulling flight tracking data, and noting the unscheduled landing. "They're already asking for a statement," the communications lead said. Elias glanced once at the scrolling headlines. Aerovista flight diverted to San Juan. Reason unknown. Then he nodded toward the compliance officer. "Package the video for release. No watermarks. Every major network. Every regional affiliate. Internal distribution to all staff before midnight." The compliance officer's fingers moved quickly over the console. "Confirmed." In San Juan, Marjorie sat back in her chair, silent now. On the table before her lay a printed notice of temporary suspension pending full investigation. The paper was angled toward her, a single signature line waiting. The FAA's liaison officer appeared on the suite's central monitor, requesting a direct briefing. "We've seen the preliminary report," she said. "If you have additional footage, we need it within the hour." "You'll have it in 30 minutes, Elias replied, "and you'll have a proposal for an industry-wide youth protection accord by the end of the week." Somewhere else, in a modest apartment in Philadelphia, a teenage girl named Amina sat cross-legged on her bed, watching a shaky cell phone clip uploaded by a passenger moments after landing. She had been removed from a first-class seat as a child. No one had filmed it then. She replayed the new video twice, the image of the boy staying still while the world around him moved. She opened a new post on her account and began to write. The compliance officer turned back to Elias. "Do we engage legal on defamation protections?" Elias shook his head once. "The truth doesn't need a shield. It needs a light." He watched the final frame of the release package freeze on the cabin scene. Noah in 4D, Clara beside him, the torn drawing on the tray table. The message on the monitors above them reading "Cabin under integrity review." Back in her holding room, Marjorie was still staring at the unsigned suspension notice, her hands folded on the table. Elias authorized the final command. The footage began transmitting to every outlet on the list. Back home that evening, a teenage girl named Amina watches the clip on her phone and begins typing her own story. 1 week later, Noah stood behind a podium barely taller than his chin, facing a silent room of reporters, airline executives, and advocates. His small hands rested on the wood, the grain polished to a sheen by decades of speeches, awards, and policy announcements. In the front row, cameras pointed toward him, their red tally lights glowing like watchful eyes. Clara Jennings had told him during the flight, her voice low and steady over the hum of engines, "You do belong here, and one day you'll see why." That day had arrived, not with fanfare for himself, but for something larger, a system built to protect others who might one day sit where he had. The Aerovista Ethics Council conference hall in Boston was spacious but warm, the kind of room where the air carried the weight of formal declarations. Light from tall windows spilled across the floor, turning the dark wood into patches of amber. Along one side, a large digital display showed the logos of 3 major airlines alongside the freshly signed Youth Passenger Protection Accord. Elias Ellison stood slightly to the left of the stage, arms folded, a stance that balanced pride with quiet watchfulness. Clara was to Noah's right, her hand close enough to rest lightly on his shoulder if needed. Across the aisle sat Amina, the teenager whose post about her own experience had gone viral in the days after the incident. She wore a simple navy dress and kept her phone face down on her lap, eyes fixed on the boy at the podium. The proceedings had been moving in an orderly rhythm all morning. Representatives from partner airlines spoke about safety and dignity. Advocates recounted statistics on complaints and incidents, citing cases that had never made headlines. Each speaker led toward the same point. The changes announced today were not charity, but overdue responsibility. When Noah's turn came, the room shifted. It wasn't just that he was small in stature compared to the suits and blazers before him. It was that his presence reframed the entire discussion. Here was the reason for the sudden cooperation between competitors, the immediate FAA attention, the policy drafts that had bypassed months of usual bureaucratic delay. He glanced sideways at Clara. She gave him the smallest nod. His fingers tightened on the podium edge, and he leaned toward the microphone. His voice was quiet, but carried in the stillness. "The sky remembers everyone." The room seemed to take that in as a single breath. Some wrote it down, others just let the words settle. Amina's hands were folded now, her knuckles pale. The ceremony continued with the signing of the accord. Pens scratched across thick parchment, the strokes deliberate. Applause followed, brief but full. Afterward, Clara and Noah stepped aside, while Elias joined a panel of executives for the press Q&A. His answers were concise, his tone one of someone who expected the commitments made here to be enforced, not displayed. Later, in the atrium outside the hall, Amina approached Noah. She crouched slightly so they were eye to eye. "You made me feel like it wasn't my fault," she said. Her voice wavered, but the words were clear. Noah blinked, then smiled just a little. Down the hallway, a section of the Aerovista headquarters had been prepared for a quiet unveiling. Staff and guests gathered around a glass case, where a single item rested on a black felt backing a child's drawing of an airplane, torn clean down the center. It hadn't been restored or taped. The plaque beneath it read, "Preserved as evidence of why this system exists." Elias stood with Clara and Noah as they looked at it. "It belongs here," Elias said softly, "because it reminds us not to forget what broke. Auschwitz." Outside the building, media outlets were already reporting on the newly launched Passenger Dignity Index, an industry-first rating system that would score airlines not just on performance, but on how they treated vulnerable passengers. Initially voluntary, it was expected to become a requirement for certain routes within a year. In the weeks to come, advocacy groups would reference this day as the moment the conversation shifted from isolated incidents to measurable accountability. Training programs would be rewritten. Crews would be briefed on new standards. And in homes far from Boston, parents would tell their children about the boy who didn't raise his voice, but still changed the rules. As the event wound down, The council hall emptied. The sunlight that had bathed the room all morning began to fade, replaced by the softer light of early evening. Clara helped Noah into his jacket, straightening the collar. Elias thanked the last of the press and joined them by the door. They walked out together into the cool air, the streetlights just beginning to glow. Noah looked up at the darkening sky, tracing the faint line of an aircraft high above. His voice was low but certain when he asked, "Will they ever try to move me again?" Elias answered without breaking stride. "No, kiddo. Now they'll move the system instead." It began with a moment so small it could have been overlooked, yet so brutal in its clarity that it carved itself into the memory of everyone who witnessed it. A slap across the cheek of a child, a drawing torn in half, words spoken under the guise of policy that were, in truth, nothing more than prejudice dressed in uniform. That was the first note of this story, sharp, jarring, impossible to mistake. In that instant, the balance between power and vulnerability tilted hard against a boy who had done nothing but sit where his ticket and his dignity said he belonged. Noah Ellison did not cry. He did not shout. He did not plead. He did something much harder. He stayed still. He held on to the torn pieces of what he had brought with love for his father. That stillness was not weakness. It was the kind of quiet strength that unnerves those who expect submission, the kind that travels further than a scream. And beside him, Clara Jennings did what allies do when the world wants them to look away. She stayed close, shielded where she could, and kept the truth intact until the moment came to act. Far away, Elias Ellison read his son's distress not in words, but in numbers: the rise of a heart rate, the shift in oxygen, the stillness of a body too young to be this composed. He had built a system to catch the moments human decency missed, but even he could not have anticipated the exact shape of this one. When he pressed the command to override, it was not just technology engaging, it was a father deciding that silence in the face of harm was unacceptable. The Blue Whisper Protocol was not just a system safeguard. In that moment, it was a line drawn across the sky itself. The flight changed. The cabin changed. Those who had sat in judgment a moment earlier began to sense they were no longer the highest authority in the room. Marjorie Kane, who had relied on the authority of her position, now faced something higher than her own rules, the scrutiny of an entire organization willing to hold her accountable in real time. And accountability, when it arrives mid-air, leaves no exit but truth. The diversion to San Juan was more than a change in route. It was a statement that this was not going to be resolved behind closed doors or in the fine print of a report. It would be met, recorded, and addressed while the act was still fresh in every mind. Passengers who had said nothing now whispered to each other, the shape of the story becoming clearer. By the time compliance officers stepped onto the plane, the silence had shifted from complicity to recognition. When Marjorie walked past Noah, their eyes met for only a heartbeat, but it was long enough for her to see what she had underestimated: not fear, but presence. The child she thought she could diminish was now the center of a truth she could not control. That was the beginning of the real turn. Elias's decision to release the footage without delay was as significant as the override itself. It stripped away the layers of spin and allowed the world to see the act exactly as it happened. In doing so, it put the conversation where it belonged, not in the shadows of policy debate, but in the light of public conscience. People remembered their own moments of being dismissed, moved aside, or told they did not belong. Some, like Amina, found the courage to speak of experiences they had buried for years. The torn drawing, left unrepaired and framed, became the perfect symbol. It was not preserved to dwell on damage, but to remind everyone that damage ignored will repeat itself. It said, without words, that what was broken should not be hidden, it should be seen, understood, and prevented from happening again. From there, change moved quickly. The Youth Passenger Protection Accord was signed, not after years of negotiation, but within days. The Passenger Dignity Index began rating airlines, not just on how fast they flew or how punctual they were, but on whether they upheld the simple, profound principle that every passenger has the right to be treated as human first. And through it all, Noah remained what he had been from the start, steady, watchful, unwilling to be defined by what was done to him. His quiet resilience became the proof of a lesson often forgotten, that dignity does not depend on permission, and justice is not a favor to be granted. It is a standard to be demanded. The difference between superficial policy and genuine human respect became clear. A policy can be twisted, misapplied, or used as a shield for prejudice. Genuine respect, on the other hand, is not situational. It does not care about age, appearance, or perceived status. It simply recognizes the humanity in front of it and acts accordingly. This story showed how immense the courage must be to confront not just a single person, but the system that enables them. It demonstrated that allyship is not about speaking over someone's voice, but about ensuring that voice is heard and honored. It proved that silence can be strength when it refuses to condone harm, and that action measured, deliberate, and unshakable is how strength becomes change. It reminded us that justice is not always loud. Sometimes it is a father pressing a button. Sometimes it is a caregiver's steady hand. Sometimes it is a child holding on to torn paper as though it still mattered. And sometimes it is an entire industry realizing that it has been seen and that the only way forward is different from the path it has been walking. The philosophy remains. Dignity is not given. It is recognized, protected, and never negotiated. If you like the story, then leave it number 1 and subscribe to our channel to hear the next story.